In Washington, there are two kinds of power. The first kind is obvious. It comes with titles, offices, security details. It's the power that gets photographed, quoted, analyzed on cable news. This is the power most people understand. The second kind is invisible. It has no title. It holds no office. It doesn't appear in organizational charts or government directories. But it moves through the system like electricity through copper wire. Silent, constant, impossible to see until it strikes. I've spent 40 years mastering the first kind of power. I know how to run campaigns, manage presidents, control the machinery of government. I know how to win. But in January 2025, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I understood about Washington. There was someone else operating in the shadows. Someone who had spent decades building something I hadn't seen. A network so vast, so deeply embedded in the fabric of government, that by the time I noticed it, it was almost too late. His name is Peter Thiel. And this is the story of the war nobody sees. Let me start with a question that haunted me for months. How do you fight someone who doesn't exist? I don't mean that literally. Peter Thiel exists. He's a billionaire, co-founder of PayPal, Palantir, Founders Fund, first outside investor in Facebook, net worth somewhere north of $20 billion. The man is real, but inside the government, he has no title, no office, no official role. He's not on any organizational chart. He doesn't attend cabinet meetings. He doesn't have a security clearance that I'm aware of. On paper, Peter Thiel has nothing to do with this administration. And yet, in my first week as chief of staff, I started noticing something strange. People I didn't recognize in meetings, names on briefing documents I hadn't approved, decisions being made in departments before I'd even been consulted. At first I thought it was the normal chaos of a new administration. Transition is always messy. People jockey for position. Communication lines get crossed. But then I started paying closer attention. And what I found kept me awake for 3 nights straight. Let me tell you what I discovered. But first you need to understand how I think about power. In my 40 years in politics, I've learned that power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's not about having the most impressive title or the biggest office. Those things are symbols of power. They're not power itself. Real power is about control. Specifically, control over 3 things: information, access, and process. Control information, and you control what decisions get made. Control access, and you control who influences those decisions. Control process, and you control when and how those decisions get implemented. As chief of staff, I control all 3. Every piece of paper that reaches the president's desk passes through me. Every meeting on his calendar I approve. Every executive order, every policy initiative, every personnel decision, I'm the bottleneck through which everything flows. That's how it's supposed to work. But within weeks of taking office, I realized something was wrong. The bottleneck was leaking. Information was flowing around me. Decisions were being made that I hadn't shaped. People were getting access that I hadn't granted. Someone had built a parallel system, and that someone was Peter Thiel. The first clue came from a personnel list. I was reviewing appointments across the administration, a routine task for any chief of staff. Who's in which department? Who reports to whom? Who has influence over what? As I went through the names, I started noticing patterns. The deputy chief of staff for policy, former Thiel Capital employee. The White House AI and crypto czar, PayPal co-founder, Thiel's business partner for 25 years. The CIO of the Office of Management and Budget, decade at Palantir. The guy recruiting for the Department of Government Efficiency, Palantir software engineer. One of the so-called Doge kids reshaping federal agencies, Thiel fellow. The nominee for Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services, former CEO of the Thiel Foundation. The official handling tech policy during the transition, Thiel Capital's former chief of staff. I kept counting. 5 people, 8 people, 12 people, 15 people with direct ties to Peter Thiel, scattered across the most sensitive positions in government. And here's what made my blood run cold. I hadn't placed any of them. They were already there when I arrived. I need to pause here and tell you something about myself. Something that explains why this discovery hit me so hard. I don't scare easily. In 1988, I was betrayed by 3 people on my own team who were secretly feeding information to the opposition. We lost that race. It nearly ended my career. That experience taught me something valuable. Trust no one completely. Verify everything and always assume someone is working against you. It's not paranoia if it's true. For 37 years, that philosophy protected me. I built a reputation as someone who couldn't be surprised, couldn't be outmaneuvered, couldn't be blindsided. They called me the Ice Maiden because nothing rattled me. Nothing got through my defenses. But Peter Thiel had gotten through. Not by attacking me, not by confronting me, not by doing anything I could see or respond to. He had simply built around me. While I was focused on winning elections, managing campaigns, controlling the traditional levers of power, he was doing something else entirely. He was placing people, cultivating loyalties, creating a network that existed inside the government but operated outside my control. It was brilliant, and it terrified me. To understand what I was facing, you need to understand Peter Thiel. Most people know the surface story. Born in Germany, moved to America as a baby, Stanford philosophy degree, Stanford law, co-founded PayPal with Elon Musk and others, sold it to eBay for $1.5 billion, first outside investor in Facebook, turned $500,000 into over $1 billion, co-founded Palantir, the data analytics company that works with the CIA and military, net worth now over $20 billion. That's the business story, the success story, the story that gets told at conferences and in magazine profiles. But there's another story, a darker story, the story of what Peter Thiel actually believes. He once wrote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." Read that again. One of the most influential men in Silicon Valley, a man whose protégés now occupy senior positions throughout the federal government, does not believe in democracy. He's funded publications and movements that call for dismantling what they call the administrative state, the regulatory agencies, the bureaucracies, the institutions that make modern government function. He's backed political candidates who share his vision of a radically transformed America, including J.D. Vance, our current vice president, whom Thiel personally mentored, funded and introduced to Donald Trump. And he's built something that most people don't understand, a network. Not just a business network, not just an investment network, a power network. The PayPal Mafia, the Stanford Review alumni, the Thiel Fellows, the Founders Fund portfolio companies, the Palantir employees, the people who've managed his fortune, benefited from his investments, absorbed his philosophy. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, connected by money, ideology, and loyalty to a single vision. And now that network is inside the government, inside my government. The question I kept asking myself in those early weeks was, what does he want? With most people, the answer is simple. They want money, power, prestige. They want to advance their careers, protect their interests, help their friends. But Thiel already has money, more than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. He doesn't seem to care about prestige. He avoids the spotlight, rarely gives interviews, operates through proxies and intermediaries. So what does he want? I spent weeks researching, reading everything he'd written, watching old interviews, talking to people who knew him, and I came to a conclusion that disturbed me more than anything else I'd learned. Peter Thiel wants to change the operating system, not of a company, not of an industry, of civilization itself. He believes that the institutions of modern democracy, the regulatory agencies, the courts, the media, the universities, are broken beyond repair. He believes they need to be dismantled and rebuilt according to different principles. Principles based on technology, efficiency, and what he calls definite optimism. The idea that a small number of visionary individuals can reshape the world according to their will. It's not a conspiracy theory. He's said all of this publicly, in books and speeches and essays. Most people just don't take it seriously. I started taking it very seriously. Because if I was right, then the people he'd placed throughout the government weren't just there to advance their careers or help their friends. They were there to change everything. The first direct confrontation came in March. We were in a meeting about a sensitive policy initiative. I won't specify which one. Around the table were the usual players, cabinet secretaries, senior advisors, policy experts, and one person who shouldn't have been there. I'll call him K. K was a mid-level official in a department that had nothing to do with the policy being discussed. I had no idea who had invited him or why he was present, but I noticed something during the meeting. Every time a decision point came up, people would glance at K. Not obviously, just quick flicks of the eyes, as if checking for approval, guidance. After the meeting, I pulled aside one of my trusted deputies. "Who is K?" My deputy hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "He's connected," she said finally, "to the Thiel network. People see him as a channel. A channel to what? To the people who matter, outside the building." I felt that cold sensation again. The one I'd felt when I first saw the personnel list. How long has this been going on? I don't know. Since before we got here, I think. It's just how things work. How things work. A parallel structure, a shadow chain of command, operating right under my nose in my own White House, and I hadn't even known it existed. I need to tell you about the night I decided to fight back. It was late April. I was alone in my office, reviewing the day's briefing materials. The West Wing was quiet, just the night staff and the hum of air conditioning. My phone buzzed, a text from someone I'll call R, a contact I'd cultivated over years, someone with visibility into worlds I couldn't access directly. The text was simple. "He's making a move. 3 new placements coming. All his people. Check HHS, DOD, and OMB." I stared at the screen for a long moment. 3 new placements, in departments that controlled health policy, defense spending, and budget allocation. 3 more nodes in the network. 3 more people who would report to me officially, but answer to someone else in practice. I had a choice. Find ways to work around the network, to maintain my influence despite its existence. That's what most people in my position would do. It's the path of least resistance, or I could fight. But how do you fight a ghost? How do you confront someone who has no official role, who operates entirely through proxies, who can always maintain plausible deniability? I sat there for almost an hour thinking, running scenarios, calculating odds, and then I made a decision. I would do what I've always done. I would control information, access and process. I would use the powers of my office, the official powers, the ones that actually exist on paper, to constrain the shadow network. I couldn't destroy it. It was too embedded, too dispersed, too well protected, but I could contain it. The war had begun. Over the next several months, I implemented what I privately called the containment strategy. It worked on 3 levels. First, information. I restructured the flow of sensitive documents so that everything passed through my office before reaching any department head. This wasn't unusual. Chiefs of staff often centralize information flow, but I took it further than my predecessors. Nothing moved without my knowledge. Second, access. I reviewed every meeting on the president's calendar. Any request for FaceTime had to be justified, documented, approved. If I saw patterns, the same people requesting access repeatedly, especially people with Thiel connections, I found reasons to delay, reschedule, redirect. Third, process. This was the most important piece. In government, process determines outcomes. When a decision gets made, who gets consulted, what options get presented, these procedural questions shape everything. I made sure that every major initiative went through formal channels, my channels. Did it work? Partially. I slowed them down. I created friction. I made it harder for the network to operate smoothly. But I couldn't stop them entirely. They were too embedded, too patient, too well-resourced, and they started to adapt. The adaptation came in ways I hadn't anticipated. I controlled the formal channels, so they went informal. I controlled access to the president, so they accessed him through the vice president. Their vice president, the man Peter Thiel had personally mentored and elevated. I controlled information flow inside the White House, so they created information flows outside it. Private channels, encrypted communications, meetings that happened in places I couldn't monitor. It was like fighting water. Every time I blocked one path, it found another. And through it all, Peter Thiel himself remained invisible. No public statements, no direct involvement, just the network, operating with quiet efficiency, advancing his agenda piece by piece. I began to understand something I hadn't fully appreciated before. I was fighting the wrong war. I was using 20th century tactics, bureaucratic control, process management, institutional leverage, against a 21st century adversary. Peter Thiel wasn't trying to control the government the way I controlled it. He wasn't interested in org charts and meeting schedules and document flows. He was trying to change what government meant, what it could do, what it was for. And his people were already inside, working toward that vision, whether I contained them or not. There's a concept in military strategy called asymmetric warfare. It's when a weaker force fights a stronger force by refusing to play by the stronger force's rules. Guerrillas don't fight armies in open battle. They hit and run. They blend into civilian populations. They make the cost of occupation unbearable. I realized that Peter Thiel was waging asymmetric warfare against the administrative state. He couldn't defeat it directly, not through elections, not through legislation, not through any conventional political means. The institutions were too strong, too entrenched, too protected by law and tradition, so he went around them. He placed people who shared his vision in positions where they could reshape policies from within. He funded think tanks and publications that normalized his ideas. He cultivated a generation of young ideologues, the Thiel Fellows, the Stanford Review alumni, the PayPal Mafia protégés who would carry his philosophy forward for decades, and he waited. 20 years, 30 years, however long it took. The network I'd discovered wasn't an attack, it was an investment that was now maturing. In June, something happened that forced a direct confrontation. The Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk's operation, sent an email to federal employees requiring them to list 5 accomplishments from the prior week. The implication was clear: fail to respond, and you could be terminated. The email didn't go through my office. I didn't know about it until after it was sent. I was furious, not because of the email itself. That was a policy question, debatable either way. I was furious because it represented exactly what I'd been fighting against, a parallel power structure operating outside my control. I called a meeting. Senior staff only. No notes. Who authorized this? I asked. Silence. This email went out to hundreds of thousands of federal employees. It threatens their jobs, and nobody in this room knew about it before it happened. More silence. And then from across the table, a voice. It came from Doug. Musk's operation. I know where it came from.
I'm asking who in this building signed off on it. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Nobody had signed off on it. It had happened outside my authority, outside the normal chain of command, and there was nothing I could do about it after the fact. That night I made a phone call. I'm not going to tell you who I called. Some things still need to remain private, but I will tell you what we discussed. I need to understand something, I said. Is this coordination or is this chaos? What do you mean? The Doge email, the placements across the departments, the private channels. Is there a strategy here or is everyone just freelancing? A long pause. Then, there's a strategy. Whose strategy? You already know whose. I want to hear you say it. Peter's. It's Peter's strategy. It's always been Peter's strategy. You're just seeing it clearly now. I had known, of course, but hearing it confirmed was different. What does he want? Specifically, what's the end game? He wants to prove something, that the old way of doing things, the bureaucracies, the regulations, the processes you love so much, they're obsolete. He wants to show that a small number of smart people with the right technology can run things better than the system you've spent your life mastering. And if he's wrong, he doesn't think he's wrong, and he's got $20 billion that says he's willing to find out. I need to tell you about a meeting that happened in July. It wasn't on any official schedule. It didn't happen in the White House. There are no records of it, no notes, no witnesses who will confirm it took place. But it happened. I met with someone who had direct knowledge of Peter Thiel's thinking, a former associate, someone who had once been part of the network but had moved on. We met in a restaurant in Virginia, the kind of place where Washington power brokers go when they don't want to be seen. You can't beat him, this person said. Not the way you're trying. Then how? You're thinking about this as a power struggle. Who controls what? Who reports to whom? But that's not what this is. Then what is it? It's a philosophical argument about what government should be, what it can be. Peter has a vision, a coherent vision. You have what? Competence, experience. Those aren't visions, they're resumes. I didn't respond. I didn't like what I was hearing, but I couldn't dismiss it either. You want to beat Peter Thiel. You need to offer something he can't. Not better management, not smoother processes, something that answers the question he's asking. Why should the old system survive? And what's your answer? The person smiled. I don't have one. That's why I'm not in the fight anymore. But you are, so you'd better find one. I've thought about that conversation many times since then. Why should the old system survive? It's not a question I'd ever had to answer before. I'd spent my career operating within the system, mastering it, using it to achieve results. The system was simply there, like gravity or weather. You worked with it. You didn't have to justify it. But Peter Thiel and his network are asking that question, and they have an answer they believe in. Their answer is, it shouldn't survive. It's too slow, too inefficient, too captured by interests that don't serve the public good. Better to tear it down and build something new. Something run by technologists and entrepreneurs and founders who know how to move fast and break things. It's a seductive vision, especially if you're young, impatient, convinced of your own brilliance. And it's wrong. I know it's wrong because I've seen what happens when you tear down institutions without understanding why they exist. I've seen the chaos that follows, the corruption, the abuse of power that inevitably comes when there are no checks, no balances, no processes to constrain the ambitious and protect the vulnerable. But knowing something is wrong isn't the same as being able to stop it. As I write this, the war continues. Peter Thiel's network is still embedded throughout the government. His people still occupy key positions. His vision still animates a generation of young ideologues who believe they're building the future. And I'm still here, still fighting, still using the tools I have, information, access, process to slow them down, to create friction, to buy time for something. I don't know how this ends. Maybe the network achieves its goals. Maybe the institutions I've spent my life serving get dismantled and rebuilt according to Peter Thiel's vision. Maybe 100 years from now, historians will write about this moment as the beginning of a new era, and I'll be remembered, if I'm remembered at all, as someone who stood in the way of progress. Or maybe the system proves more resilient than the disruptors expect. Maybe the institutions adapt, evolve, find new ways to serve their purpose. Maybe the network overreaches, as ambitious movements often do, and collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. I don't know, but I know this. I'm not going to stop fighting. Not because I'm certain I'm right, not because I believe I can win, but because some battles are worth fighting even if you lose. The battle for institutions that constrain power, the battle for processes that protect the vulnerable, the battle for a government that serves the people, not the visionaries who think they know better. These are battles worth fighting, even against a ghost, even against a $20 billion ghost who has no title, holds no office, and controls nothing, except the people who control everything. There's one more thing I need to tell you. Remember how I said this war is invisible, that nobody sees it? That's not entirely true. Someone sees it. Someone knows exactly what's happening inside this White House, inside this government, inside this moment in history. Now you see it too. And seeing it changes everything. Because invisible wars only stay invisible as long as people don't know to look. Once you know where to look, once you understand the patterns, the networks, the strategies, you can't unsee it. So look, watch the appointments, follow the connections, notice who talks to whom, who rises unexpectedly, who seems to have influence that exceeds their official position. The network is there. It's operating right now as you read these words. It will continue operating tomorrow and next week and next year. And the only question that matters is, what are you going to do about it?
They call me the Ice Maiden because I don't let emotions dictate strategy. But sometimes, late at night, when the West Wing is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I feel something that isn't cold at all. I feel the weight of history, the knowledge that what happens here, in these rooms, in these decisions, will shape the world long after I'm gone. And I feel something else, something I rarely admit to feeling: hope. Not certainty, not confidence, just hope. Hope that the institutions will hold, hope that the processes will protect us, hope that the system, for all its flaws, all its inefficiencies, all its maddening complexity, will prove stronger than the forces trying to tear it down. Hope that in the end, the shadows will remain shadows, and the light will win. But there are shadows within shadows, and in the deepest shadow of all, that's where this war is being fought. Every day, every decision, every moment, you just couldn't see it until now.